Later on, we'll have a chance to say, what are we doing, and what we can do and be voices to send back to the media or to other people to express our feelings. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on how we can brainstorm. Next, we have Craig Crawford, who's the Acting Vice President in Operations of BC Housing. Nice hand, please, for Craig Crawford.
So, like Michael Shapcott, I have a real fascination with the money. So, I'm going to talk to you about the money today. And I want to really cover off and give you a sense of the range of funding and sort of activities and strategies that BC Housing is using to work with the nonprofit sector to grapple with homelessness. The framework for what we're working on in terms of our strategy to homelessness is it's informed by Housing Matters BC, that's the provincial housing strategy. And goal number one in Housing Matters BC is that the homeless have access to stable housing with integrated support services. So goal number one, pretty clear statement in terms of what we're all trying to work towards. And getting right to the money. This is a graph of the funding that has flowed through BC Housing, starting back in 2004-2005, and peaking in 2010-11, with a bit of an ominous dip after 2010-11. It's not that ominous in the sense that some of that dip is related to one-time capital grants or infrastructure that we've cost-shared with the federal government and are putting into buildings. But I mean, the key message here is that the provincial funding, this is actually the graph of just provincial funding, has more than doubled since 2005. This has put an interesting strain on the system, actually, in terms of the capacity within our organization and the nonprofit sector to respond. So this is sort of the scope and scale of what we're involved in. It's a range of responses and strategies to deal with homelessness. And the key concept at the end of the day, and it's pretty well known to this group, would be the key goal is permanent supported housing. So there's outreach, there's shelters, box SROs, all that stuff. But the end game of all of it is creating self-contained supported housing as the ultimate solution, the permanent solution. It's not shelters, it's not warehousing, it's permanent housing. So I'm going to run through some of the segments here, and from outreach right up to the new supported housing, and just try and talk about a bit of the numbers and the scope and the scale of what we're involved in. So we've got outreach teams in 49 communities, including 8 Aboriginal teams. There's about 89 outreach workers. The budget in 2009-2010 was $6.2 million for the outreach program, with a $1.2 million budget for homeless rent supplements. Targets for this activity obviously is the street entrenched, not in shelters. And the results as of April 2010 to present, so from April of 2010 to now, the outreach workers have been able to find housing for just over 3,000 people across the province. We started out, we initially had a target of when working with somebody and getting them placed in housing through the outreach system was a 6-month, that would be remain housed 6 months after placement. We thought that maybe 60% of the people that were housed would stay for 6 months. And the results, the surveys, the feedback we're getting right now is 89% are actually staying housed for more than 6 months. So that's a great outcome. The success factors, I think, are developing relationships with private landlords for the rent supplements and bringing the support services to the tenants. And also fast-tracking protocols with the Ministry of Social Development to get people placed on income assistance the same day. So we've got the tools the outreach workers have with rent supplements are they've just got 1,076 rent supplements to work with. So moving on to the shelter program, it was great to hear Sean's comments. I think BC Housing's role is to bring the money to the nonprofits and set up some deliverables, some accountability with the nonprofits, and then get out of the way and let the nonprofits do what they do best. And listening to Sean's conversation and discussion about how they organize themselves in those shelters was really interesting to hear. You don't want bureaucracies in there trying to figure out how to run this stuff, so it was just great to hear how that kind of worked out. The shelter program wasn't always with BC Housing. It came over to us in 2006. And I look back at that now and say, well, it's pretty obvious it should be with BC Housing. It just fits in that whole continuum of outreach to shelters, to transitional and permanent housing. But it wasn't always so. It was with the Ministry of Employment and Investment, or Income Assistance, prior to 2006. And it was a really significant shift for everybody to get comfortable with moving all the shelter providers to move over to BC Housing, comfortable where they were, I guess, with the other ministry. And it wasn't without some trepidation that the whole system had shifted over to us. So when it came over to us in 2006, we had 880 year-round beds and 390 seasonal beds, and with a budget of $10 million. In 2010, 1,500 beds in 33 communities, 1,200 additional extreme weather spaces, and a budget of $57 million. So a pretty significant shift and a lot of support for that program. 90% of the shelters are now the 24/7 operation. Again, at the time, that was a big deal. Now it kind of seems very common sense, but the 24/7 from our perspective was an absolutely a big move. You heard some of that from Sean's conversation as well about what that had the effect on the tenants or the clients of the shelters. 95% of the shelters now provide 3 meals a day. So keeping people in the shelters, not kicking them out on the street every day, for the community around the shelters, it just was a huge acceptance and feedback from that. We hear from municipal politicians and avoiding the lineups and some of that other issues that cause them some concerns, and the 24/7 shift, I can't emphasize how important that was and what a great approach that is. It just facilitates connections to health, community, and social services, and on and on. Not to keep talking about what everybody else said, but the low barrier shelters, people have pets, people have shopping carts, and shifting. Now about 40% of the shelters now are low barrier, and it's low barrier, there isn't a defined term for that, but just the shift to that approach, dealing with pets and shopping carts, has had a huge impact on the effectiveness of the shelter system. So now I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is the acquisition of the single room occupancy hotels. The strategy behind this was preservation of existing stock. The stock was getting lost, and not just in Vancouver. I'd like to emphasize that. This was a strategy that was applied across the province. It was a preservation strategy while new stock gets built. Nobody accepts that the SROs are the ultimate goal. They're not self-contained. There's lots of issues with them, but it's better than nothing in the meantime. So the acquisition started in 2007. And around that time, I remember the City of Vancouver had a target of, their plan was to try and buy 1 SRO a year. So in 2007, we bought 12. In 2008, we bought 8. And in 2009, we bought 7. So a total of 27 SROs. Bought them in Vancouver, New West, Abbotsford, Quesnel, Kamloops, PG, Williams Lake, Nanaimo, Victoria, Port Alberni. Not just a Vancouver-centric model. Obviously, a lot bought in Vancouver. We bought so many so quickly that we really did stretch the capacity of the nonprofit sector to respond. We were literally phoning nonprofits saying, we just bought another SRO, can you provide the property management services for it? And some of them were saying, we just can't gear up, sorry, we're going to pass on this one. So we ended up with 1,556 units after the renovations. We spent $91.8 million buying them. So far we spent $53.7 million fixing them up, and there's a whole bunch more fix-up required on them for sure.